We are so excited to have Dr. Delaney back again to chat into more plants. Dr. Delaney comes to us very prepared. She's a cardiology specialist at Port Charlotte and in Florida. She's got 36 years of experience in the medical field. She graduated from University, West Virginia University and West Virginia Medical School. And she's been in Port Charlotte for 20 years. Plus, she's got personal experience and family experience in dealing with many of the chronic diseases she treats. So what does she do with her knowledge? Well, through her membership practice, she teaches patients that food is medicine. Yes. And she helps them achieve health, which includes elimination of medications through a plant-based diet. And her approach is really unique. She sees patients in the office, just like regular doctors, but she also does telemedicine with patients all over the world. She provides, and I'm going to look at this list so I won't miss anything, mobility classes, habit change programs, nutrition classes, online resources and newsletters, registered dietitian services, support with exercise program, and once in a while, she offers yoga in her office. Most all of that is online for her membership practice. For those that aren't in her practice, she also makes available a newsletter and also a fantastic podcast. She's an avid reader of research and other materials, ready to bring that information to her patients as well as others, including Chat and Chew. In fact, Chef AJ, I just saw her in an interview with Chef AJ, and Chef AJ said this multiple times. Don't you wish you had a doctor like Dr. Delaney? She's amazing. And she is. This is her 5th time with Chat and Chew. And she's going to be teaching about diabetes and heart disease and how they're related, but also that little thing she's so good at, how to prevent and reverse both heart disease and diabetes. Welcome back again, Dr. Delaney.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back. It's always fun to see everybody. I get to see the faces that I know and perhaps some faces that I don't know.
Okay, so I think you're going to start with a PowerPoint, right?
I think so. Let it rip.
How's that?
All right. Why I became a cardiologist. It's funny. My daughter and I have always had the discussion, but I always knew that I wanted to become a doctor. And part of it stems from my family history. I remember my mother's mother, my grandmother on my mom's side, riding to the hospital. She was an obese lady, had diabetes, heart failure, and we would often have to go pick her up in the middle of the night, go to the hospital. As an early age, I remember the breathing pattern of diabetic ketoacidosis, her having to get oxygen. They dropped me off in the waiting room sometime in the wee hours of the morning. They, come get me, we'd go home. And then my other grandmother, who I spent a large amount of time, an Irish grandmother, my dad's mom, had adult onset diabetes all the time that I knew her. She died at 72. I would guess I used to spend my parents' work, so I spent my time with her. So, probably 55 on, she had diabetes. She took a pill a day. If she didn't have sugar in her urine, she was supposed to be okay. If she didn't eat sweets, well, she had a massive heart attack at age 72. And that pretty much sealed the deal for me as far as wanting to do something along the lines of diabetes and heart disease. And cardiology made sense to me. And that's kind of where I headed. And the idea was, how do I keep other people's grandmothers from having heart attacks? Both of them taught me a tremendous amount of, just with the symptoms that I watched and observed that they had. And obviously, having the strong family history that I do, my granddad died at 48 of a massive heart attack. How do I avoid it? Because I know that, I've never had genetic testing done, because I'm pretty sure I know how it would come out. So the idea is, how do I live the best health span for myself and for my family? So again, my grandmother was taught that if she didn't eat sugar, so if she didn't eat pie, she didn't eat the pies and cakes and cookies that she made, that everything would be okay. And the reason why most people think sugar diabetes is a sugar problem is that's what we measure. That's what we measure in the blood. It goes up. But the question is, why does the glucose go up in our blood? Our main source of energy comes from sugar. And if you look at sugar, it has, it's carbon, water, and oxygen. And fat is also carbons, water, and oxygen. But our body can process glucose and turn it into energy very quickly with a little bit of oxygen. So it's a rapid fuel that we get a lot of. Our body depends on it. When we start to have problems, we can't get, and our muscles are where the metabolism occurs. So we have to get that sugar from our bloodstream into our muscles so that it can be processed into energy. The problem with diabetes is when it comes into glucose comes into the cell, it's blocked by fat. So if you think about a keyhole, fat's in the keyhole, the glucose can't get in, and it goes up into the bloodstream. So we measure elevated glucose, but the problem is it's an excessive amount of fat. So it's fat in the cell, fat blocking the receptor, and then fat that we eat. So the first thing that happens with diabetes is that people are given medications. And my grandmother was given a medication way back called DULANEY'S. And a lot of the medicines that are first line drugs are similar to that, in that they cause the pancreas to put out more insulin, because we need insulin to drive glucose into the cell. So if the glucose is not getting into the cell, the thought would be the more insulin we have, we can push it in. So it's like having 4 linebackers push the running back through the line through the defensive line. And so the medicines, basically, again, tell the pancreas, put more insulin out, put more insulin out, put more insulin out. Well, insulin is actually the cause of a lot of the secondary side effects. Insulin causes an increase in insulin-like growth factor that causes abnormal growth of cells, which increases the risk of cancer, increase immune mediators that cause more inflammation, increase platelet stickiness, and vascular changes, so that over time we start to have problems with the kidneys, the heart, the eyes, and multiple things start to occur. And the next step is usually a drug called metformin, which tells the liver, don't put out as much glucose. And so if we go back into metabolism just a little bit, again, our body wants glucose to make energy in the muscle. And it's going to use that energy first. No matter what anybody tells you, we want to do that. Our body's going to use more glucose, a little bit of fat burns in the background. If you think about a fireplace, you can burn a little bit of coal, but the wood's going to burn much easier. We have to replenish those stores. And if our blood glucose goes down, it's our liver's job to release some glucose to maintain that level around 80 to 90, which is a normal glucose level. If you get a blood test, the blood test will say less than 105, but we know greater than 95, we're starting to have problems with insulin sensitivity. So we're going to say a normal glucose is about 80 to 90. So if you start to do some activity and you're burning off glucose and you're making energy and your blood glucose starts to go down a little bit, the liver puts glucose into the bloodstream. So everything's maintained. Our body is trying to always maintain the pH, maintain fluid balance, and maintain glucose balance. Metformin is a drug that blocks the liver's ability to make glucose. So he's like, well, now one thing that helps, if you have too much glucose already, we don't need the liver putting out more. But the problem is that when people get, say, right before dinner time, and they're starting to wear down on their glucose, all of a sudden your glucose starts to drop because you've used what you've eaten at lunchtime, so to speak. Typically the liver would put out a glucose, but when you're on metformin, sometimes that doesn't happen. And I experienced this with my mother. All of a sudden, 5 o'clock, she would kind of crash and burn, so to speak, get the shakes, get sweat, feel awful, become very fatigued, want to, be sleepy. And that was because her glucose was starting to drop and she couldn't have more glucose put in the system by her liver because she was on that medication. So all the medications that we have, and of course, there are newer generations you see on TV of medications that increase the production of liver, increase the production of insulin. decrease the liver's production of glucose, and also delay gastric emptying so that we're not putting as much fuel into the system. So if we eat an apple, we have to absorb it through our stomach and our intestine. It has to go into the blood and back. So this is a mechanism of all these pills that are used to treat diabetes, but it never gets at the cause. And so our body still continues to struggle because we can't get glucose in the cell. Some people will say, go on a ketogenic diet, so just don't eat glucose. But remember, our bodies organs want to use, and especially our brain wants to use glucose. If you eat just a fat diet, obviously there won't be any glucose in your blood, or very little glucose in your blood, just what your liver can maintain. Keto diet, we talked about the medication. So again, a vicious cycle. We're not really getting, really getting any place as far as fixing the problem. And so the problem, the solution is to get the fat out of the diet and get the fat out of the body. And that really is the key to getting our metabolisms back in order. Okay. So for starters, Kat has a little slide here now. We can see normalized body mass index. And a lot of times, it's very difficult in today's society because people that are overweight, I feel okay. And it's normal for me, or I'm a bigger size. But we know that body mass index, which is your height and your weight taken into order, really will define our overall muscle mass, bone mass, fat mass, and overall our health. So for a certain size individual, the body mass index normal is 18.8 to 24.8. And we even know that in women, a body mass index that is 24.8, especially as we get older, we still tend to have more fat mass around our organs than we need. So one of the keys to reversing diabetes is to normalize the body mass index. And sometimes on top of that, normalizing body composition. And when I say body composition, sometimes people will say, well, I've lost a lot of money I've lost weight and I've lost muscle because my skin is flabby. But the reality of it is, as we age, we tend to lose bone and muscle mass. And that starts at about age 30. So when we finally, decide to do something, maybe at 50, then all of a sudden we realize just how much water has gone into the bridge, so to speak. So by increasing muscle mass through exercise, strength training, endurance activities, running, walking, swimming, then we're increasing muscle mass, increasing bone mass, and decreasing fat mass. The beauty of that is the muscle is where the metabolism is. The muscle is where we're using energy, whether it's energy from fat or energy from carbohydrate. We do not use energy from protein. Protein is building blocks. So protein does not come into this conversation at all with regard to metabolism. So by exercising and building muscle, we're actually building the organelles or preserving the organelles called mitochondria that help us to utilize energy and to ultimately keep our fat down and normalize our BMI, normalize our glucose.
All right, well, if what we're doing is looking at that fat in the muscle, what should we do about fat in our diet? I mean, obviously, if we take fat in, it's got to go somewhere. So talk to us about how fat works into the whole food plant-based diet.
Right. So again, back to the premise that our body works on carbohydrates mainly. Fat is our storage fuel. And so we burn a little fat as we go. We burn fat when we're sleeping, we're not eating. But we're still burning some carbohydrate. So our body is based on carbohydrate metabolism for the most part. And the beauty of plants is that They have the exact amount of macronutrients that we need. They're about 80% carbohydrates across the board, about 10% fat, and about 10 to 15% protein. So you can go 10 to 15% fat, 10 to 15% protein, 75 to 80% carbohydrate. You know, the breakdown can vary whether we're talking broccoli or beans or an apple, but it's all within that little range that's very good for what we actually need to use it for. And obviously we're talking about whole foods. We're not talking about just eating sugar as a carbohydrate source. The problem that people get confused about is when we're talking about energy versus we're talking about nutrition. And if we're talking and when we're talking about changing body composition, we're usually talking about just energy. And it doesn't matter what energy you're taking in as long as it's less than what you're burning. So when we're looking at weight loss, we just need to have less energy in and more energy out. And no matter what anybody tells you, fat and carbohydrate are all made up of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and water. So when our body sees that organic chemical, after you break down the peas or you break down the steak, the energy is the exact same. What is different is the nutrients. So a whole food plant-based diet is rich in fiber, rich in antioxidants, rich in vitamin and minerals. So that's where we get more bang for our buck. So food is not just about energy, it's also about nutrition. And that's where it kind of gets confusing, especially, you know, when you open up the internet, because most people, when they look to nutrition, are primarily looking to what tastes good and fills me up, and what's easy to get. And then the next part is it going to make me, you know, how do I look, right? So when it comes to exercise, we either want to be in physically good shape enough to do the activities that we want, and we want to look a certain way. The same thing with nutrition. We need nutrition to help us to be healthy, but the amount of nutrition will also come into how big or small we actually are.
Yeah, that's great. Good. And you've explained how exercise helps with diabetes. Now, can you talk about the mitochondria and this vicious circle about what happens with the mitochondria?
So the mitochondria are little organelles that are inside each and every one of our cells, and particularly in our muscle cells. The mitochondria were thought to originate actually from bacteria that was incorporated into our cells, you know, many, many moons ago, so to speak. But the mitochondria is what is where energy is produced. So we take glucose in, swallow it, goes into our bloodstream from our intestines into our bloodstream, and then it goes into our cells. And again, remember, if the fat is blocking the cellular uptake of glucose, then we have decreased glucose coming into the cell. Once the glucose gets into the cell, and if we look at this picture, you have a picture of a mitochondria. If we think of the cellular cytoplasm or the fluid within each of our cells as being the white part, energy starts to being produced in the cytoplasm. So we get a little bit of energy produced in the cytoplasm, and we come out with a chemical from the production of, or the reaction of glucose into a chemical called pyruvate, then goes into the mitochondria and actually generates more energy. We need energy for calcium and bonds to shift and muscles to contract. And that's what happens in the mitochondria. So when we exercise, we actually can build muscle and build the number of mitochondria. When we're sedentary, we lose mitochondria. There are many mitochondria in each muscle cell, so it's not a one-to-one. But if you take a picture of a 30-year-old and you take a picture of a 70-year-old, you'll see a marked reduction in mitochondria in the muscle. There's actually a study done that looked at Scandinavian 80-year-olds that had been Olympic athletes, and they continued to cross-country ski, and compared them to 80-year-olds in the United States that were predominantly sedentary. The number and function of the mitochondria in the 85-year-old Scandinavian people were not much different than when they were younger. the mitochondria number and function in the 80-year-old sedentary Americans, much, much less. So we know that lifelong exercisers, lifelong people that move can maintain their mitochondrial function. It's not something that has to go away just because we're aging. And I would have to say that one of my biggest frustrations is, and I don't know the answer to this, and maybe somebody will chime in and help me. At what point, as we age, do we give up and say, it's all downhill, I'm just going to ride it out? Because I see that over and over, but it doesn't have to happen. If lifelong exercisers can preserve that function. And if we look at blue zoners, I mean, there are perfect examples. Blue zone people that don't know, people that live to be 100 in parts of the world that are, for the most part, living independently, have their wits about them. They're moving, they're climbing hills, and they're eating predominantly a plant-based diet. So we know that lifelong exercise and good nutrition is a way to maintain health into a health span, as opposed to we'll just patch you up as you go along.
Yeah, and we can look good with exercise. It can help with our health. I mean, there's just so many reasons we need to do it. Now, heart disease, talk with us since you're a cardiologist. We know you've explained how diabetes connects with it, but what about heart disease just if you don't have diabetes? What things can we keep in mind?
So when you exercise, there's a big buzzword out there that most people hear, especially with the people wearing smartwatches, is called VO2 max, which is the maximum amount of oxygen our cells can take up. And again, that goes back to metabolism, because if we can't take up oxygen, then we can't utilize energy. And a lot of that goes into cardiac function. When we look at VO2 max, and what that means is our heart has to deliver oxygen to our tissues and blood to our tissues. Each contraction, we squeeze out a certain volume of blood, and that is called our stroke volume. So every heartbeat, there's a certain volume, stroke volume. Stroke volume, and then how many beats per minute equals cardiac output. That's how many liters of blood per minute we can deliver to our tissues. We know by exercising, we can increase the cardiac output, and usually your heart rate goes down. So what happens is that the heart beats better, it beats more vigorously, so we can get out more volume per beat, so our heart does not have to beat so quickly, and so it becomes more efficient. The other thing that exercise does is it decreases total body inflammation, so that we know that during exercise, your blood pressure may go up, your heart rate may go up, and even inflammation goes up. But the reset, or the rest period after that, markedly improves inflammatory markers.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And diet is important for heart disease too, obviously.
Obviously, because we want to maintain. So if we look at a blockage, people that have, they flunked their stress test, they have a heart catheterization, they have a 90% blockage. What's in the blockage? And it's not just cholesterol, it's inflammatory cells, it's white blood cells, it's calcium, it's all kinds of different things. So it's a bag of bad, so to speak. The vessel gets stiff over time. It loses its inability to dilate. So when we eat greens, we actually produce nitric oxide that helps the blood vessel dilate. So when it can't produce its own nitric oxide, we can help it along and make the blood vessels dilate, collaterals dilate, so it makes it easier for the heart to pump. When we, on the opposite end, if you eat a high saturated diet, then you're promoting more cholesterol, more fat, more byproducts that are inflammatory to go into those blood vessels to make it harder for the blood to get into. So a thick, sticky, inflamed blood is more likely to clot than one that's not.
This is a quote that was in that podcast that I've heard you talk about this. How does that relate to what you've been saying?
Well, again, the more muscle people have, the better their mitochondria, the more that you're utilizing energy. Running races and you see people eating crappy food, or you see people doing these long events, but one of the things that people are doing is burning through, because, you're burning through some of this food, and your body is utilizing the energy. But when you take in excessive amounts more, and you've lost muscle and you've lost ability to metabolize those foods, then you start to accumulate more metabolic waste more rapidly. So if you've got a big fire burning, it's better than a smoldering fire that, so if you're trying to burn brush, we have a Hurricane Ian here, and out in Arcadia, they're trying to burn all this brush that they've collected from people's trees that have gone down, right? So when you're trying to burn, if you just have a little smoldering fire, it's going to take a long time, and you're going to have a lot of waste left over. But if you can get a big fire going with more muscle, more mitochondria, you have a better chance of going through and eliminating this waste.
Great example. So exercise and weight loss with diet are key. You would agree?
I would.
Okay.
Can't have one without the other. Need both of them.
Okay. And which kind of exercise would be important for us to do?
The one that you'll do the most. And that's really what it comes down to, consistency. And Kathy, you were a school teacher. You know that if you had to be consistent with teaching children, certain things, in and out, day and day, to really get the concepts and get things through. If we do things consistently that we like, and if we like them, we're more likely to do them consistently. That's the number one reason to choose an exercise: consistency. After that, we like a combination of body movements. We know that to prevent bone loss or increase bone mass, we need to weight bear. So things like running, strength training, fast walking, those are all going to be weight-bearing mobility exercises. Those are going to be more weight-bearing exercises, so that we're actually stimulating our bones to make more bone. Swimming is a wonderful cardiovascular exercise, wonderful mobility for your arms and your legs, your breathing, your diaphragmatic breathing. So it also offers, but it, again, with people that do water aerobics, they're not going to be weight-bearing. Sometimes easier is not always best. Let's put it that way. Easier is not only best. So we need a variety of things that actually stress. We need stress to the body to make it keep going. Biking is good. You can build muscle, but you're not going to build bone mass. Biking restricts your range of motion because your foot never comes, your knee never goes behind your hip. So it's not as much range of motion. But if you throw biking and mobility exercise in there, great. So combination is best, but consistency has to play a role. And, one of the things that I've looked at myself is, I like to run. I like to run. Sometimes I get injured because I'm using those same muscles over and over again, and I'm not training the other muscles. So I have to pay more attention to mobility. I also have to pay more attention to strength training to help my running. When I was doing triathlon and I was biking, swimming, and running, I was probably more well-rounded because I was getting a little bit of all of those in together. But, it does help to have a plan and what we're trying to achieve. Even when it comes down to strength training, Addie and I were having a discussion, sometimes I just go through the motions, doing, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I figure I spend 30 minutes lifting something pretty heavy and that'll do it. But it's not doing it as good as would if I was doing with a specific plan. So if I'm going to strength train to build muscle, am I going to strength train to build strength? Or am I going to strength train to build, the power or the speed of something? So there's different nuances within each of those. Am I going to swim short for cardiovascular, long for endurance? And then the grip strength, that's a that's a sign of longevity. So when your grip goes, your muscle tone, is going, your hand and your grip are your forearm, your arm muscles. So maintaining that grip strength is just as important as being able to walk, and the speed at which you walk is also important. We know that people that can maintain a fast walking pace, you have better neurological connections to your muscle. A nerve has to fire in order for you to walk. So fast walking, you have more neuromuscular connections, more balance, so that's also important, the speed at which we go. Not that every walk has to be rip-roaring speed, but we want to make sure that we're not doing the Yorkie stroll, where the Yorkie gets to smell every daisy and your quarter-mile walk takes 2 hours.
Okay, so no Yorkie strolls, but say we get going and then it's hard to stay on track, especially with diet. What do you recommend?
You got to have a goal. You got to have a goal, and you got to have a plan. I think the best example is, the bell curve. We all know what it is. There's a big rise in the middle, and it gets thin on both ends. And when I look at nutrition or change in general, it tends to be at the small end. And, where people that are new to change are kind of just right there when the curve starts to go down a little bit, and you can get sucked back into the way you used to be, right? I'll give the example of my running pace. The first marathon I trained so that I would live through it. So I didn't want to get hurt. I wanted to survive the event. I wanted to enjoy the event. So I didn't go too fast. I kept conversational, and it was slow and steady wins the race. And that's fine. But to make that, to now take one step up and try to go. So the next race, it's like, I think I want to go a little faster. And so I've got to do something different. But my body's like, I really like that slow and comfortable pace, So if I wasn't paying attention, then I would drift back to that slow and comfortable pace. That's what we do with nutrition. If we don't pay attention, we drift back to what's easy. Let's just go get takeout one day. Let's just go get this prepared meal. Let's get something that's already, fixed for us or prepared for us. And then that turns into 1 day out to 2 day outs to more than, and it becomes that consistent progress starts to decrease. Yeah. And the next thing you know, we're in trouble. So I have there's a ton of people that come in and they think that they're unique, but it happens to just about everybody. You go great gung ho for a week, and then, 3 or 4 days bad, and then you go great for a couple of days. Then a couple of days you're off track. It's consistency. So what I like to do is I like to have people be mindful of the worst day. Everybody remembers when I ask them what they had to eat, they always remember the best day. I had a salad, it had all these vegetables in it. I had a kale, I had all this fruit. I had a baked potato with, sauce on it. It was perfect food. That's fine. That's a good day. We have to know what happens when you're tripped up. Where are the roadblocks? That's what we need to assess. So a lady last week I talked to, and she's like, the weekends are a roadblock with the kids. We're out with the kids. We're doing more, and we're exposed to more things. We get hungry, we get hangry, and then we go and do something. It's like, okay, so how do we prepare for that? If you're going to a kid's ball game, maybe pack some healthy corn muffins or healthy muffins or some baked tofu or some sort of snack that will keep the kids full, keep everybody from getting over the top hungry. Have the food prepared for when you come in, you just pop it into the oven, pop it, and you're ready to go back. So if you're prepared for the roadblocks, it makes it much easier to be consistent than just depend on having more and more good days. Follow me?
I do. I think that's so important. So this slide you showed for Chef AJ's interview, and it just says so much. Can you talk about this one for us?
Yeah, when we're born, we have a clean garage. Everything is functioning perfectly. There's been no toxic exposures. life is good. And, we go on to be teenagers and we can still do the fast foods and there's a little bit of grime in the corners, but not a big deal. But as we get older and years and years and years of, let's just give an example of eating a Pizza Hut meat lovers pizza. How about that? That's a good one. So we've got to do something with the nitrites from the pepperoni and the saturated fat and the cholesterol from the pepperoni and the excessive amount of protein from the cheese and, whatever chemicals that were in that pizza crust and all that kind of stuff. We have to store that in our cells somewhere because our liver can't handle all the bad stuff we're giving it every day. So we store a little bit each day in the garage. And then we wake up at age 65 or 70 with a cluttered garage and we start to have elevated glucose because the glucose can't get in the garage because it's too full. It's blocked with fat. We start to have more inflammation because things are spewing out. Paint cans are falling over into the bloodstream, causing inflammation. We start to have things breed in the back corner and making new cells, which would be a cancer. So this is because of full garages for the most part. Then we say, okay, we're going to go on this radical change. And so we're going to take, that towel off that old chair, and that's going to be our dietary change. And we wonder why things aren't getting tremendously better. Well, we have so much stuff in our garage. Taking that towel off the chair didn't really do much to clean out the garage. We need this massive cleanup that, is very, again, consistent. We need to take out 2 wheelbarrowfuls every day consistently over time to get that garage looking to the point where we can even see the walls. So that's, really, and when I run, I look in everybody's garage.
Oh, that was fantastic. And it's such a good example. And, all through your presentation, I heard all those wonderful examples that make it real to us. Now, we've got a lot of people in here that I'm sure somebody's going to have a question. So
I'm going to go first. I have a question.
Okay.
I want to talk about lifelong exercisers. And just to give you an example, let's say we have a lifelong exerciser that was athletic, exercised great until about age 50, 55, started slacking off, maybe not so much, and then wakes up at 63, 4, 5 and says, man, I'm out of shape. I'm going to do something about it. And that lasts maybe 6 months or a year. And then they wake up at 68 and man, it's worse now. Is it ever too late?
It is never too late. Even in nursing home patients that are put on a strength training program, their mentation increases and they do better. Your metabolism will improve, inflammation will decrease. So there's no age that it's not too late to start. The problem with us humans is that we tend to go out gung-ho. So you wake up at 50 and you say, I used to run at 40, so I'm going to go out and bust it. You get an injury, and that sets you back. And then it comes, well, maybe I'm too old because I'm getting injured. I had to laugh. We had a run club as part of I just did it as part of the community. And we started meeting at 6:30 at a park and walking for about 3 miles. I was trying to get more people interested in running in the community. And I think most of the people were certainly over 40, but it would probably be more like 45 to 70. And every one of them fell down.
Oh, wow.
Every one of them. I mean, we had finger fractures, everybody fell down. So would you say that maybe it shouldn't happen? And it's like, no, it just needs to happen more. Because you can't get good at something unless you do it often. And, to sit in the chair, you probably won't sprain your ankle, but you will deteriorate as far as your muscles, your metabolism, and your bone. So we have to keep moving to, so the little that, everybody focuses on, oh, I twisted my ankle. Oh, this happened. It's a process, the more we do it. And, if I'll go ahead and share, but I just did a 50-mile run and I was on the ground 4 times during that 50-mile run. It was very rooty and I hadn't run on roots before for the most part. And I was cocky because I wasn't running on rocks. and the roots seemed easier. But what I didn't realize is there are still roots under the leaves and pine needles, even though you don't see them. And when you try to wear one contact for distance and one contact close up, you even see them less. So I was on the ground 4 times during this 50-mile run. And this morning when I was out walking, because I'm still recovering, it was last week, I started laughing to myself. And it's like, you know what? That was pretty good. Because 50 miles and only down 4 miles, that was less than 1 time every 10 miles. So that's, that's not that bad of an average, plus I had my bone. So I went down to the ground, I got back up, nothing's broke. Few sore things, but nothing is broken. And so my bone mineral density must have been pretty good. So I'm going to forego any kind of x-rays to tell me that my bones are healthy.
That's a plus for sure.
Dr. Delaney, I commend you for doing 50 miles. I mean, that is totally, totally incredible. I have a few questions, and I can see that we have some coming up, but I'm always talking to people and they are loving the keto for diabetes and the keto for heart. And I know you will probably have some choice words for those. Can you please address those for us?
Again, if you don't eat anything, your glucose is going to go down to normal, right? So if we eat nothing, your glucose will be normal in a couple days. If you eat only fat and you measure your glucose will be normal in a couple days. But again, just like the diabetic pills, measuring your serum glucose is not telling me that you're metabolically sound, meaning that metabolically you're able to handle glucose. So that when, and you will, want carbohydrates because your body really wants them, and you can, be constipated with foul breath and cranky for a long time and lose weight. You'll lose weight on a ketogenic diet because you can't eat Twinkies on that. You can't eat ice cream on that. When you do eat carbohydrates, you have put so much fat in your cells that you're probably going to make it worse, so that your glucose will spike. And you'll say, see, the sugar caused it, but it wasn't. You were actually making the diabetes worse. Now, if you're able to stay on a ketogenic diet and normalize your body mass index, and then go back to a plant-based diet and you've normalized, you might be able to transition okay. But in that time period, however long that takes, you're decreasing your muscle mass, you're decreasing your bone mass, because remember, you need some carbohydrates for your brain. So you're going to break down muscle to make carbohydrate for your brain. It's a known fact that you decrease muscle mass and protein mass over time. Decreasing muscle mass over time is going to decrease your mitochondria. So when you go back to eating, your metabolic function is not going to be as great again. So over time, you've gotten to one place, you've got a weight, you've got one metric, maybe a number on the scale, but metabolically, you've not improved yourself. And there's an increased risk of cancer. You're not getting fiber, you're getting more carcinogens, you're getting more metabolic waste. So even though you're adding stuff to your garage, so to speak.
And you're getting more inflammation.
And more inflammation over time. So I've seen the highest cholesterols in any people that have done ketogenic diets, by far, in the 300s. I mean, it's almost across the board, their cholesterol being in the 300s.
Okay.
Dr. Delaney, along those lines, one of the questions in the chat box, one of the comments is, a plant-based diet and lifestyle was started not too long ago at age 65, and they were eating plant-based and exercising. And 2 weeks ago, we had a diagnosis of AFib. So the person is asking what they did wrong.
Well, again, how long do you think they were on a plant-based? A couple years?
2 years.
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, you got that garage. Depends on what was in it. So we know the reason atrial fibrillation is one of the most frequent abnormal arrhythmias that we have. It's the top chamber of the heart tries to quiver. It's getting a bunch of electrical stimuli that go down, and the bottom chamber tries to keep up. So it's typically a rapid heart rate. The problem with it, because the top chamber is quivering, you can get blood clots. your heart doesn't pump effectively. So people get a little bit more fatigued and shortness of breath if their heart rate's fast. If left untreated, the heart muscle can weaken because it's like you're running a race. So it's not something that we want to have if possible. But the causes, for the most part, hypertension, so longstanding high blood pressure. Just because you're on a plant-based diet doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have your blood pressure under control. Some people get their blood pressure under control quickly. Sometimes, again, if there's more problems, if the etiology of the high blood pressure is more extensive or different, it may take a different approach than what you're doing. So high blood pressure is a reason. Valvular heart disease. So, if you've had high blood pressure, or if you've had a history of rheumatic fever, or there are some hereditary mitral valve issues that cause valves to leak, cause the top chamber to stretch, that can cause atrial fibrillation. Valvular heart disease leading to hereditary valvular heart disease leading to atrial fibrillation. Probably 20% of AFib. I'm guessing it's not all that much, but still that's something that diet would not affect that much. The other thing is lung function. So people that have sleep apnea or chronic lung disease or a bronchitis, that can cause it because you have changes in pressures in the lungs. People that are overweight, increased risk of atrial fibrillation. So it may be that you're on a plant-based diet, but the weight hasn't, you haven't normalized your body mass index. The other thing is changes in volume. So we have normal people that have a sudden change in volume. So you get profoundly dehydrated, or let's say you go get, my favorite people to pick on is Chick-fil-A. You get a high salty waffle fry and you have to retain water because of all that salt you've taken in. So that changes the volume, causes a stretch in the heart, can trigger atrial fibrillation. So we've seen subtle changes. Flus, people being very sick, getting dehydrated, getting overhydrated can cause atrial fibrillation. Any kind of lung disease can cause atrial fibrillation. And there probably is an increased risk in an athletic heart. We see it more in people that were collegiate athletes under a very high level, either changes over time, but athletes tend to have a little bit increased risk because of stretch of the heart of atrial fibrillation. So diet, we like to think that diet fixes everything. It certainly helps, but we're not 100%.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Delaney. So Laura is an academic dietitian, and she says that some of her colleagues have been working with Ozempic, or maybe she wants to know about Ozempic and weight loss programs. What are your thoughts on that?
For every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Isn't that a law of physics? That's also a law of pharmaceuticals. So Ozempic, one of the ways that you lose weight is decreased gastric emptying. So your stomach, you have less food comes through, you feel full, you eat less, you lose weight. And people can have modest improvements in their hemoglobin A1C. It also causes your pancreas to put out a little bit more insulin, causes your liver to put out a little less glucose. And so that's how it works. Decreased gastric emptying is a neuropathy. So when people have longstanding diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes, they develop autonomic neuropathies, basically nerve problems in the intestines and motility, and gastric autonomic neuropathy is actually the result of one of longstanding diabetes, and you have delayed gastric emptying. So things just sit in the stomach. So how could it be good for food just to lay in the stomach? Because we're not going to tell them, remember, because the Ozempic, we're not telling people to eat differently, or we may tell them to eat an ADA diet, right, or eat less. But for the most part, they're going to eat the same type of foods, less of them. We're not getting rid of the metabolic waste. We're just delaying it and delaying gastric emptying. We're fiddling with your autonomic nervous system, which has also already been fiddled with because of underlying diabetes. And then we get all the side effects from that. So not a fan. Again, these medicines treat the number, but don't treat the underlying mechanism of diabetes. And that is, you can't get glucose into the cell. None of them address that. And so unless you're addressing that, then you're having to deal with all the side effects of treating the number.
Dr. Delaney, here's a question from the chat box about the Gundry diet. And if you spend much time on social media, there must be a heck of a marketing plan going on there, because that's about all you see out there. So how would you even begin to approach that with someone? Where do you start? Because there's parts of it that are healthy, that would work.
I go back, you can, for starters, go back to the blue zones. They were not whole food, plant-based eaters, right? They ate for nutrition. They ate modestly to keep themselves going. They ate simply. So it was whole foods, predominantly plants, and they moved. The problem is, in America, we want to eat when we want, what we want, as much as we want. And anybody that tells us that our preferred food group is on the list, we want to hear more of that. Dr. Gundry, so how do if I'm going to market and I want to be, it's like, I've always been the outlier as far as, that 20%er, the 6% of women that go to become cardiologists, the 25% that it's not so much anymore, go to medical school, the girl that played Little League baseball and tap danced, I'm always on that end of the spectrum. All right. So I'm very comfortable not being in the middle. But that end of the spectrum is small and lonely, just like I told you with that J curve. So there's not that many of us. If I want to make the most money, I got to be in the middle. I got to grab everybody. And to grab everybody, I got to tell you what you want to hear. So I got to come up with some way of eating that you still get to eat a steak. You still get to eat a burger. You just may have to let the bun go, or you may have to do something. Throw a bean under the bus. Again, go back to the blue zone. 95% of the biggest thing that they ate were beans. That's one of the things that 95% have in common. They all eat beans. So the lectins in beans, throwing some little vegetable. How many people do you know that said, I was really healthy until I started eating Great Northern beans, and then just life went to wherever, everything started going wrong when I started eating beans. That's not where you find it. If you're on the internet and you have to watch something for 45 minutes and then the guy at the bottom is trying to sell you something, I would be suspect. So, I think to be an influencer, you have to make a lot of people happy. To be, honest, you have to take the risk that you're going to make a lot of people unhappy.
Dr. Delaney, going back to Laura's question about drugs and weight loss, do you recommend any drugs for weight loss?
I do not.
Okay.
Do not.
Okay, and Dr. Delaney, we have several people, or a couple of people, who have asked about fuel during short and long races. And then one is asking specifically about a 24-hour endurance. So could you do short, long, and then endurance, please?
Yes. So short, let's say short's a 5K. So I hope that's good in the chat room or whatever. I don't do anything for say a 5K race. I would get up in the morning, typically have my usual whatever I had for some little breakfast and go, so it'd probably be more of on the long of hydration, some fruit and go. Usually I don't ever eat anything. I like to be without any food about 2 hours until I go to a race. I like to let my body digest, clear the tank, so to speak, and go on. So typically I'll have a cup of coffee. If I'm traveling, it's maybe a cup of coffee in a bar. That's usually where I'll get. I have some endurance bars that are fairly healthy that I'll eat, so pretty easy to digest. If you go to half marathon level, then you need some sort of sugar intake. Most people do. Again, you're burning glucose. It depends on your efficiency, how much you've run, how fast you run. The faster you run, the more you're burning solely glucose. And so you need to get rid of it. And again, our mitochondrial function kind of dictates that. But usually the gels, some sort of 100-calorie intakes, 1 or 2 of those for a half marathon. The full marathon, after about an hour of running, usually it's a gel every 30 minutes or some sort of electrolyte drink. It becomes tricky as far as electrolyte drinks. People drink too much and they can actually become more water than salt, and they become hyponatremic. So if somebody's out on a marathon course, let's say for an exceptionally long time, but they're drinking 6 ounces every aid station at 3 miles of Gatorade, they can actually get too much fluid in. So you're better off to drink to thirst. I think it was in the 70s before the Olympics let the marathoners have anything. You have about 2,000 calories of glucose in your muscles and about 200 calories in your liver. That gets you to mile 20. So you're going to be running on fumes the last 6 miles unless you take something in. So I usually start to take something in every half hour to 45 minutes in something that I can tolerate glucose wise, like a gel. I don't do any solids in a marathon. I may do electrolyte drink if it's really hot. If it's not, I may just do the gels and water. So it just varies and depends on, I usually don't do much of what they have on the course other than take their water. I don't do the Gatorades. They have too many other additives in them. I might take a gel if it's one that I've used, but I don't usually surf off of the aid station tables. The ultra marathons, so let's say 50K, 30 some miles up to wherever. I've not done any more than 50 miles. Then it becomes tricky because now you're starting to burn more fuel than you can get in and absorb. So if you look at, say, even Tour de France, the reason why people are limited in their speed and endurance is their ability to get enough calories in. So again, your body's going to maintain its glucose store. So it's going to suck the glucose into its muscle. Your liver is going to try to get as much glucose into the bloodstream as it can to maintain that glucose in the 80 to 90 range. And if you need to burn fat, think about, you have to get it from somewhere. So there's not that much fat in the muscle. So you actually, if you're going to burn fat from your belly, let's say, it's got to be broken down into your bloodstream, taken to your muscle, taken up. And so it's not really efficient. You can take in some fat if you can tolerate it. And the question is, what would that be? And, absorb that probably a little faster and it'll burn some background. But that's really the point that I've not mastered it yet, because my last 50 mile, I slowed down tremendously in the last 16 miles. And part of that was the inability to take in enough calories. Nothing looks good. I'm tired of sugary things. I don't want Pringles. I don't want M&Ms. I don't want bacon. So your choices are pretty limited as far as what are you going to take in. My last race, I had ramen noodles. They were the Lotus brand, so they weren't the cheap, greasy ones from the, dollar store. But, so I had that at a turn where our tent was. That went down pretty good. I had mashed potatoes. That went down good. So again, a source of starch that's savory, that's not so repulsive as those gels after a while. But that's really what becomes difficult. And I think most people that run long distances eventually run into that, and you've got to find out what's worked. So I have some ideas for the next race. We'll see if I'm going to try avocado as a fat source because it has carbohydrates, fat, and a tiny bit of protein. I'm afraid of hummus because it can be, a lot of fiber and a little gassy. So it's not an easy thing. I think that that is the challenge of going long and, at that point. So I hope maybe it helped. If you have any ideas, please text me them.
If you're taking medication or if for some reason you're not on medication, but your thyroid is misbehaving, how do you factor the accommodations that might be necessary into the diet? Or does the diet accommodate the thyroid?
Well, I will tell you that on a strict no sodium, no added salt diet, and people that aren't eating out at all, not eating anything processed, I have seen people get a little iodine deficient, and that's affected their thyroid function. So you have to watch, kelp, nori, dulse flakes are sources of iodine. Then sea salt, or iodinized salt. Sea salt not often isn't. Sometimes Himalayan salt, you have to look. Is there iodine in the sodium? So some people actually require a little bit of supplementation, and we do a kelp iodine supplement in those people. I was always taught that when your thyroid stops producing thyroid hormone, that, it's kind of game over and you have to take some sort of supplement the rest of your life. It kind of depends on how long and what the problem was, because I have seen people's thyroid get better. Some of them, depends on how long. Obviously, if you've had your thyroid removed, it's gone. If you've had it irradiated, it's gone. And so you have to take some sort of supplement. And that doesn't really interfere with a plant-based diet. If you're taking in thyroid, you're taking in T4, T3, thyroxine as a medication, a synthetic medication. People get along just fine.
Okay, well, boy, that was fantastic, Dr. Delaney. Thank you so much. You really are the greatest explainer ever, and we appreciate your knowledge for us. So we will see you again soon, I'm sure. So thank you so much, and we'll say goodbye to you, and then Debbie's going to tell us who our next speaker is. So Debbie, why don't you do that for us?
So Dr. Baxter Montgomery from Houston, Texas is going to be our next speaker. It's March 23rd. It is a Thursday, and it is going to be at 5:50 in the evening. Okay. But Dr. Montgomery has a program. We've all heard about food as medicine. Well, he actually prescribes the food, and he calls it the Food RX. So anyway, it's going to be an excellent presentation. I hope everybody will sign up